Hello, it's Rachel here, and for our Rhythm of Life films during the month of June, we're going to be looking at the Old Testament book of Ruth as part of the Methodist Church's Bible Month. So I'm starting us off with chapter 1, and I'm going to begin by reading just the first 5 verses. In those days when the judges ruled, there was famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Many of the stories I remember being told as a child began once upon a time, and I always hoped that they would end and they all lived happily ever after. But very often when it began once upon a time, the setting, the situation, the start of the story was so far removed what you thought happily ever after should look like that it made you wonder how they were going to get there. Would they ever get there? And was happily ever after possible at all? That could also describe this opening of the book of Ruth. Once upon a time for Ruth is the time of the judges. This was quite a dark, chaotic period in the history of Israel. It was a time of moral and spiritual decline, of frequent rebelling by Israel against God, which led them eventually to say to God, "Give us a king so that we will be like all the other nations on the face of the earth." Once upon a time also means that we are in Moab. Now, there is not a happy relationship between Israel and Moab at this time. It seems that they've had long, fraught, difficult relationships. The people of Moab worship idols and not the God of Israel. The law in Deuteronomy says that no Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord and that they are not to seek a treaty with them. Largely here because they did not meet the Israelites with bread and water when they came out of Egypt and were in the wilderness. It can't have been easy for an Israelite such as Naomi and her husband Elimelech to move from Israel into Moab. But once upon a time is also a context of great suffering. First, there is famine, and then the family experienced deep grief, first in the death of Elimelech and then of their 2 sons. There is an underlying background throughout the book of Ruth in this cultural context and historical setting of famine, of poverty, of displacement and migration, sexual threat, exclusion, sexism, racism, as well as this grief. Therefore, I think it makes it a good book or a story for our times. Is there not similar issues and underlying tensions and backgrounds in our own world today and cultural context? Be that as the effect of the COVID-19 virus that affects not just us, but countries throughout the world. There is the Black Lives Matter, which has reared up again strongly following the death of George Floyd, recently murdered in America. There is the Me Too movement. There is still great poverty and homelessness, and there are the effects of universal credit on many people. There is still famine and drought in our world, often because of climate change, which often affects the poorest countries the most. And there is still migration and displacement. What is our response? How do we respond as the people of God in godly ways to hardship and suffering and loss in our world today? Be that our own hardship and suffering and loss, or that of others. Let me read on in chapter 1. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." But she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has been against me." At this they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the 2 women went on until they came to Bethlehem. There are many choices in this opening chapter of Ruth. We all have to make choices in different ways at different times, some more important and significant than others. Naomi's choice is to go home to Bethlehem. This is a very brave choice, as a widow who is now childless and therefore vulnerable and lost her security appears to be wanting to go alone. Naomi also wants to make the choice on behalf of Orpah and Ruth, telling them, "Go back." Perhaps Naomi recognizes that it won't be easy for the 2 young Moabite women in Israel. Orpah eventually chooses one thing, after a little bit of persuasion, to go back home, whereas Ruth chooses another thing. I wonder what informs their choices. It seems that one important factor is the kindness of which Naomi speaks. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead and to me. The Hebrew concept of kindness here is chesed, which is often translated as loving kindness and is often used in the Old Testament of God and his covenant love. It carries a connotation of generosity, that it is a loving kindness that is not deserved or merited by the one who receives it. It is a loving kindness that goes the extra mile, that is beyond expectation, is all-inclusive and self-giving. It goes beyond social conventions or the requirements of the law. This is Naomi's blessing for Orpah and Ruth, that they would receive God's loving kindness in the same way that they have shown loving kindness to Naomi and her now dead sons. Both women loved Naomi. Orpah loves Naomi and is kind to her. She does no wrong in returning home and not going on with her. This is because probably of her love for Naomi. She does what Naomi asks of her and is obedient, a way of showing her respect to her mother-in-law. But Ruth shows her love in a different way. She loves her and then loves her more. Beyond expectation and social convention, she makes self-sacrifice in going on with her, evoking within those who hear her story, perhaps astonishment and wonder at her actions. Ruth is just an ordinary peasant woman showing extraordinary loving kindness and sacrifice, and making perhaps a renewed commitment to Naomi in promising that I will go with you, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. What motivates our choices? Is it that same loving kindness, that chesed? A loving kindness that is not expected or anticipated, but joyfully and willingly goes the extra mile, above and beyond the call of duty. What do our choices reveal about us, about our own character and priorities? What do our choices reveal to us about our understanding of God and God's character and priorities? Jesus teaches us in the New Testament to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our soul, all our strength and all our mind, and to love our neighbour as ourselves. This is the summing up of the law and of our duty to it. But this concept of chesed teaches us to go beyond the requirements of the law and our duty. Jesus redefines what it means to love our neighbour and who our neighbour is. We are to love in a different way, beyond convention. To love those society deems to be unlovable, to love our neighbours, to love those who are different to us, to love those that we may be suspicious of, that we don't agree with. Chesed shows us how we can live together and create a community that reveals God's kingdom. We will see this loving kindness, this chesed, woven through this story of Ruth. So as we go on this journey, look out and listen out for it. And may God's eternal loving kindness so transform us, transform you and me, so that you can do no other but to share it. Share it with all whom you meet. Share it through the choices that you make, the way you think and speak and act. And share it through the way that you respond to the world in which we live. This chapter ends with verse 22. And with Naomi and Ruth arriving in Bethlehem as the barley harvest was beginning. We began with a hopeless context of famine. We end this chapter with glimmers of hope, the hope of harvest. May we journey with Ruth and through the book of Ruth together with hope in our hearts. And as we do, may the Lord bless us and keep us, make his face to shine upon us and be gracious to us, look on us with kindness, loving kindness, and give us his peace. Amen.